Well, it's lovely to have you all here, and such a diverse range of geographies all over the world, as always. And we really value that really global perspective that we try to bring to the work that we do here, but we learn a lot from you on this. So I can see a lot of faces that I know really well, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Harriet Molyneux. I'm a future of work advisor and a responsible business advocate, and I'm MD here at HSM Advisory, and I've been working with our founder, Professor Lynda Gratton, for Lynda, it's nearly a decade.
I can't believe it.
I
can't believe it.
I know. Time's flown past.
Yeah.
And so today we're going to be taking a look at our 2023 World Outlook. For those of you who've known us for some time, you know that we produce this every January of each year, when we look at what did we learn from the past 3 years? What were our lessons learned and or big trends that came out? And then what are our big bets for the following year? Now, to share these insights with you, we have none other than our founder, Professor Lynda Gratton of London Business School. And Lynda is joining us, as she says, just back from Davos. So she'll be sharing with us the latest insights and we'll be combining those with our World Outlook insights as well. But let's just take a look at where we've been, and I'll hand over to Lynda to take us through this. So here we have Professor Lynda Gratton, the author of best-selling books, including The 100-Year Life and Redesigning Work, and the co-chair of the WEF Global Future Council on Work, Wages and Jobs, topics that are very much on our minds. So Lynda, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. And hi to everybody. Wonderful to see everybody. You know, our webinar series kicked off at the beginning of the pandemic, and we thought we'd just be doing a few. And as you, I mean, well, I don't know how many we've done now. It's a lot of them. And I think we just learned also that these sort of virtual presentations are absolutely brilliant. So great to see everybody. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly look back over 2022, and then I'm going to look forward to 2023. So let's take a look at looking back over 2022, if we can have the next slide. You know, the pandemic obviously had been a huge story in 2021. And I think even in 2022, the pandemic and what happened during the pandemic, how we felt, the technological skills that we developed, the reflections we had, still are playing through, still played through in 2022. But of course, the economy tanked in some countries, high inflation, real concerns about recession. And actually at Davos this year, the word on everybody's mouth was the polycrisis, you know, that we've got the vestiges of the pandemic still being felt in some parts of the world, particularly China. We have real low growth rates. Some countries are in recession. And at the same time, of course, the war in Ukraine is creating enormous amounts of instability, but some really positive aspects, particularly around the US and the focus that they have on the green economy. So, you know, we can see still the pandemic being felt. During the pandemic, of course, we talked about this a great deal, that it was an opportunity for many employees to ask, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? When am I doing it? And we still see the exercise of choice in 2022. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at the year ahead. And of course, I wrote the book Redesigning Work. HSM worked with a lot of you on this issue of reimagining what work could be, how the interactions with employees could work out. And of course, you know, leaders are still very, very crucial. And I want to say a little bit more about that in a moment. So that's looking back into 2022. Let's take a look at the three areas that we really thought categorized 2022. Let's talk first about the power balance. You know, somebody at Davos said to me, you know, we had the battle for talent and talent won. I'm not entirely agreeing with that, but certainly there's a big power balance shift. Partly, of course, because some sectors, and I'm thinking particularly of frontline work, factory workers, had incredible attrition rates. I spoke to somebody at Davos in a very large US company where the turnover rates were running at 60% per year. I mean, that's basically you're running a recruitment shop, aren't you, if it's at 60%? But we're getting high turnover rates and at the same time, massive labor shortages. You know, there's 10 million jobs in the US which are unfilled right now. And that inevitably changes the power dynamics. When organizations have high turnover rates, they're finding it hard to recruit, then leaders are asking, well, should we change the deal? And that, not just leaders asked, should we change the deal, but actually people asked that as well. And as they saw, you know, friends in other organizations getting a different deal, they were beginning to say, why are we designing jobs like that? And I think this power balance has shifted. I think it's sort of, I think the recession is shifting back. You know, you've seen big layoffs, particularly in the tech sector. And so we're moving, you know, back to a slightly more balance in terms of power. But I still think that talent is currently in a very powerful position. The second thing that we talked about a lot last year was that when we disconnected and got into the homes, work from homes, what we began to realize is that was having a big impact on connectivity. And the interesting thing, remember, about the old style of job design, i.e. when everybody came into the office every day, is work wasn't really designed. It was simply done. And so as we began to take out aspects and elements of work, what we saw was that connectivity turns out to be really important. We saw network shrinking, we saw loneliness increasing. So I think that last year we did begin to really focus on friendship. You know that I wrote a number of articles about that. And we began to think much more intentionally about connectivity. And I think as we encourage people to get back into the office, as many of you are doing, that's going to be a real important aspect of that. I have a friend at work is one of the reasons why people stay. The third area that we talked about, and if you remember, I wrote that rather nice Harvard Business Review article with Diana Garson, who just stepped down from IBM, was about middle managers. And if you remember, middle managers turned out to be the unsung hero of the pandemic. Those of you who had great middle managers found that people were more likely to stay, they were more likely to feel good about themselves. And so we at HSM did a really wonderful piece of work, I thought, on what the new managerial contract was, which said it wasn't just about performance-focused skills and human-centric skills, but it was also about hybrid-enabled skills. And if you haven't seen that work, please do reach out to us and we'll send you a copy of it. We're now, as we'd hoped, supporting a whole bunch of you, helping you think about hybrid, thinking about these skills and really working at the level of the manager. And what I think's wonderful about the HSM approach is, as in everything we do, we see learning as a peer-based activity, not as a sort of training activity. So if you're interested in helping your managers to move into these new managerial skills through both new information, but also working with each other, please give us a shout, because middle managers became really important. Now, let me ask you in this next poll, you know, what did you find? So in terms of the polling question number one, I'm hoping that it's obvious to you how you answer that poll. I can't see it myself, but I'm sure it is. There it is. And you just simply click onto one of those. Did you think, we're going to ask you, by the way, in a moment, have you had any other ideas? So please don't feel constrained by this, but what did your organizer prioritize in 2022? Shifting balance between employers and employees, building friendships and connectivity into your business planning, and middle managers. Which of those would you like? I'm going to submit mine and let's see where we are on that. So just go onto your screen. Let's go back to the polling question and let's just see where we are on the polling question first before we ask. So middle managers, okay, I'll give you a moment for everybody to do that, but it's actually, hang on, so I've got to make a note. Middle managers, 47% of you said you prioritize that, 39% looked at the shifting power, and only 14% looked at connectivity. My suggestion to you is take another look at that. We think it's a big issue for this year as well. Great to see, though, so many of you looking at middle managers. We felt like you that was a really important issue. So thank you for that. But of course, in this poll, we've really just given you 3 choices. But my guess is, as you think about this, you're asking, well, hang on, Lynda, there was lots of other things we were working on. I know you were. So if you go to www.menti.com and use the code 31198824, you'll be able to just write that in. And we've also put it into the chat as well. So if you could just say something about that. Hybrid work, of course, was big. Diversity inclusion, we think that's still on them. We're going to come back to that. We agree with that. That's going to raise its head again in 2023. What else were you finding? Purpose. I know Harriet has said to me that in her many conversations with you, purpose is coming out as being really crucial. Mental health, hybrid working. I have a very nice article coming out in Harvard Business Review next month, which looks back at my wonderful, you all remember, I've just got it's a show and tell. No, we don't need Siri to be talking to me right now. I've got a sort of follow-up on my hybrid work, so we'll make sure that you take a look at that. That will be out in a month's time, which really looks at where were we on hybrid work. So happy to share that with you. Authenticity, yeah, we've think about that. Communication, preparing for the recession, obviously a big conversation at Davos. And actually what I'd say there is CEOs, are always saying, well, happy to do all this hybrid stuff, but we're not going to allow it if we think that it reduces productivity. So those of us who care about that need to be sure that we make the link with productivity. D&I coming up. So some of the still a big issue around hybrid, mental health, diversity and inclusion is coming up. Data analytics, a big topic, by the way, again at Harvard, at Davos, partly because there's lots of tech companies there who, of course, use enormous amounts of data and data analytics. Massive projects on top of BAU. I don't know what that is, but that sounds interesting. Mental health is coming up a lot. Dealing with the fallout from the Ukraine war. Yes, we talked to a couple of the recruitment companies. Randstad, for example, are doing incredible work with refugees from Ukraine. I know that some of you have got some great pieces of work happening on that, really supporting this, the terrible thing, supporting life stages as well as career stages. Yeah, that's really interesting. Future-proofing skills, lots of great ideas here about a 4-day week. There was a nice piece in, we did a panel at Davos last week on the 4-day week. You know that some of you I know are running experiments. Unilever, for example, is, and a number of you are. I think until we really get some pretty good data on that, companies, especially at this period of time, are not going to push for the 4-day week. But let's see where we are. Workload and work pressure. Skills was, I thought, the number one piece at Davos, certainly from my perspective. I ran six sessions on skills. And if you want to, Jan is saying, yes, we just really started it, and we started hybrid. I agree that on the Harvard Business Review article I've written about hybrid basically says, we thought it would be finished by now. Guess what? It's not. It's only just beginning. So again, we've done some marvelous work at HSM advising our clients on hybrid working. Do get in touch with us if you'd like to take a view of where you are, how far have you got, what more do you need to do. Recruitment, yeah, big issue when you've got a high turnover rate. Okay, so thank you so much for that. As always, we'll send you a note later on today which summarizes some of these key points, but those are big shifts that you've experienced as well as we've experienced. So let's move forward to 2023. Where are we? We're in January 2023. We've come in with a very odd combination of labor shortages and economic recession, which is a combination we don't often see. So So there's all sorts of different pressures on your CEO. We're going to focus on a couple of areas. First is the hybrid and new ways of working is still playing out. Many of you are doing experiments, and what we're noticing is a lot of variety, both between organizations in terms of what you've chosen to do, but also in terms of within companies, and some significant tension points there, which I'd like to speak about in a moment. And certainly for many of you, the status quo is something that you're thinking, we don't really know if this is working for us. We might have to think again about that. And quite a lot are saying we don't really have a clear working strategy. We've been asking you in our polls over last year about that. And certainly we notice that many of you are saying, we don't really have our working strategy agreed yet. So let's take a look at the three areas that we think are going to be important. Let's start with negotiating the deal with your people. And that's certainly complex. And let me just say a couple of points about that. The first is that, your employees have got a whole set of complex feelings at the moment. One is, during the pandemic, they enjoyed, many of them enjoyed working at home, those that could. At the same time, the cost of living is a big issue right now. People are worried about losing their jobs. And so it's a more complicated story than last year, frankly. And those who are in jobs where they feel there are alternatives, there is a high rate of attrition. And certainly in manufacturing jobs, in frontline working jobs, in some of the care jobs, the attrition rates are running very high. And that's part of why we have labor shortages. But, there is increased economic pressure, and we'll see that play out over the next year. But that's something that your CEO is very aware of. And there's a big focus on costs. So when there is a recession, those of you who've been through a recession before, as I have, you often get high levels of inflation. That means that people want to get paid more. Therefore, you get strike action because obviously, that's people don't want to build increased inflationary wages into their cost base in a long-term basis. They'd rather give one-off cost of living packages rather than long-term pay increases, and that's what you're going to see playing out over the next few months. But at the same time, there's still a big gap between people's lives and how work is structured. And this has been very much part of how we in HSM think about the world. We think about it in terms of technology changes, in terms of social changes, in terms of demographic changes. And if you take a look at all of those, and I won't rehearse that right now, there is a gap between rather classic traditional ways of working and what it is people want. So negotiating the deal is still really important. Here's the three things that we think you should be thinking about when you think about renegotiating the deal. And of course, we at HSM are here to help you in any one of those things. We're doing amazing work at the moment with many of you. And so do feel free to just pick up the phone or talk to one of us about how we might help. But this is the sort of thing we think is going to be important when you think about renegotiating. First of all, get the deal. And what's really interesting is organizations are differing a great deal about what the deal is, because you have to think about your own purpose, your own business model, the sort of people you employ. So whilst it's good to look at best practice in other companies, fundamentally you have to do the deal yourself. And I know that many of you are really focusing on saying, what's special about us? What's our signature? What's our deal? The second thing is, and we had a very interesting conversation at Davos about the Edelman Trust stage, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but the say-do gap is really important. I mean, people trust you in part because of your competence. And one of the ways that they decide whether you're competent or not is to ask themselves, did you do what you said you were going to do? So if you make the deal explicit, then you also have to get to be sure that you're actually delivering on that and clearly communicating it. Very interesting how many of you are either heads of comms or have comms as part of your HR role. And I think that we've got to be really thoughtful about how we communicate. You know, at HSM, we have these wonderful tools and practices that help you to talk to many hundreds of thousands of people about issues. I see that as being a very important tool in your toolbox going forward. So renegotiating the deal is going to be part of what happens this year. We haven't heard the end of it. So define it, make sure you actually do it, and then communicate it really clearly. The second point we wanted to raise is really about what's happening to work. And interestingly, a lot of the conversation at Davos was about the impact of technology on work. And particularly those of you who haven't seen ChatGPT certainly need to take a look at it. I'm sure you have. Of course, as a business school professor, this is a big issue for me because it can actually produce an essay which you would probably pass as an MBA student. Now, the reason that ChatGPT is really important is that it's the first AI that really looks as if technology will start replacing cognitive work. We've seen technology work replacing routine work for years and years, but this is the first time we've really seen it replacing cognitive work. And as some of my friends who run the tech companies were saying to me, Lynda, this is just the beginning. You've no idea what's coming along the line in a year or two. So where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us really with looking at the human part of the work. As technology does more of the simple stuff, it focuses on you looking at the human side. Of course, we know that anyway from the pandemic showed how important it was to reach individuals wherever they were. There were fewer boundaries between work and home. And, you know, I'm sitting at home now. Some of you are in your office, some of you are at home. And, you know, politics and economic realities have made human workplaces a priority. I mean, simply put, if you want to get people back to the office, as many of you do, I think you have to think about the office has to be a place where they meet other people, where they do collaborative work, where they do cooperative work. And so the human-centric aspect becomes ever more important. Let's just take a look at how we think you should be focusing on this and what we're doing with our own clients this year in terms of helping them design a human workplace. The first thing is creating a psychologically safe environment. Many of you, when you talked about what was on your mind for this year, talked about diversity and inclusion. And that inclusion piece comes from a psychologically safe environment. Interestingly, the Edelman Trust data show that leaders are highly trusted, even more so than some NGOs. And they're highly trusted because people feel safe to talk to their colleagues about things that they perhaps couldn't talk to their neighbors or friends about. Isn't that interesting? That the organization is now seen as a safe place for conversations. And that's why the work that we're doing, where we create these places where people can talk to each other, is really, really important. So that's the first thing. Really think about how do you create psychologically safe environments. I think the second is that people trust leaders, and they trust them in part because they have something that's important to them. They have a purpose that's important to them, a purpose that creates positive experiences. I wrote a very nice piece in Sloan Management Review last month about this. And certainly, if you haven't had a look at it, we'd be happy to send it to you. But really, the idea that people need a sense of the connection between them and the work. Now, it could be that it comes straight down because you're very purpose-led. It could be that you give people a choice to explore their own purpose. But this idea that work has got to be a positive experience, I think is something that we all need to really examine as we think about this year. And thirdly, we need to build energy management strategies for human workplaces. We talked a lot about resilience last year, and resilience is really about how do you manage your energy? And that's partly about work design. For example, one of the obvious things is that we all built in far too many meetings, some of which are highly energy depleting. So how do you take those out and really ask people, and ask particularly teams, what do you need to do to manage your energy? Because burnout is something many of you have talked about. And unless you address it yourself, there's no mechanism in organizations to help burnout. Work just gets more and more. So we have to think very intentionally about how we manage energy and how we manage burnout. Okay, so let's take a look at the third point that we're seeing, and it's about increasing inequality. And we have some pretty important data on that shows that actually, when you look at who's coming back to work, it's not women with children, it's not the over 50s. And so we have to be really thoughtful around that. And one of the points that a number of the gender experts at Davos made is they think that certainly gender inequality is increasing. And that's always the case at times of recession, by the way. At times of recession, often the first thing that you lose sight of is issues of inequality. And the two big issues I think that came out at Davos and comes out in our own work is women, particularly women who have caring responsibilities. Importantly, people with frontline jobs. So the new and varied approaches to working has resulted in big changes, and it has favored office workers. So it's your office workers who are working from home. It's your factory workers who are still, working the old in the old way. And we see this as a real challenge. Many of you have significant labor shortages, particularly with your factory workers. We need to think about that. We'll say something about that in a moment. But factory workers is a focus of attention for us this year. And so we are seeing real inequalities within organizations. So don't let your response to the pandemic be a catalyst for increasing inequality. How do we think about that? Well, let me just make a number of comments about what we think is going to be important. One is focus on flexibility. If you think about how do you help people have a more inclusive experience, part of it is that they have more autonomy. And part of that autonomy is I have some flexibility about where and how I work. Now, clearly, when it comes to office workers, you've given quite a lot of flexibility about where they work, the place of work. And you've seen that that's been a really important part of the deal. But actually, for shift workers, for people in caring responsibilities, for frontline workers, they're place dependent. And that means that you need to explore flexibility about time. And that's something that we've been working with a number of you, thinking about how do you create more time flexibility, particularly around shift workers. We can see from speaking to a number of you that you have got some really interesting and exciting experiments on that this year. So I hope that by the end of the year, there's going to be a lot more intentionality around flexibility, around time, as well as around place. The second is really about teams. And I think one of the things we learned in the pandemic is that teams were really the major unit of productivity, not individuals, but teams. And so how those teams work together, and particularly the role of the manager, is going to be absolutely crucial. So how do you help teams promote autonomy? So both within teams, but also importantly across, because one of the things that we've noticed is that you want your teams to be autonomous, but at the same time, because they're working with each other, there needs to be some notion of fairness between them. So how you work with individual teams, but then how you work across teams is a very important part of how you promote equality. And finally, keep that definition of flexibility broad and think both about time and about place. So on to our second poll, which is really about 2022. And again, we're asking you, first of all, to choose from the 3 trends that we've identified, and then we'll ask you in a Menti what's on your mind. Okay, so pretty much equal. I mean, you've actually said 36% designing more human workplaces, renegotiating the deal, 35%, 29% ensuring your flexible working practice. I've just had a chance, by the way, to look at the chat, because even though I'm a woman and can multitask, it's hard always to do all of this and look at the chat, but really interesting points. I want to actually just highlight the points that Indra's made and Alice also has made, which is technical awareness remains a big gap between generations. ChatGPT, if you haven't looked at ChatGPT, you really need to. I wrote a piece about it, but unfortunately I couldn't get it published because everybody in the world is writing about ChatGPT. It's got unbelievable implications. If you haven't already gone into ChatGPT and asked it a question, you really need to, because it is an astonishing development. And as my friend who's the co-founder of LinkedIn told me, Lynda, you haven't seen anything yet. So I agree that you do need to take a close look at what's happening with this AI, because it's the first AI that's honestly had a big impact on cognitive work. And many of you have cognitive people. So that's going to be important. So thank you for that. Let's take a look now at let's use the Menti now to see what other expectations do you have. I'm sure that there's lots of things that are on your mind that haven't Yes, and also thanks, Rob. I agree with you. Playing together is about agreements and compromises. Ursula, we'll have to make sure that everybody gets that HBR, because that's one of the points I make, really, is that it's all about team agreements. And that means you have to train your managers to do team agreements. We can help you there. Okay, connectivity is going to be important. Talent well-being still equality is coming up. Skills gap, yeah, that was the biggest thing at Davos, actually, was the skills gap. Layoffs. Wow, we had some astonishing stories from the tech firms who just basically sent people a text in the middle of the night saying, don't come into the office tomorrow. I'm sure you've heard the same. That's a massive destroyer of trust. What a shame. So we have to think very carefully about how we downsize for those of you who've got to do that. Inclusion of elder workers, yay! Thank you. If anyone wants to talk to us about elder workers, obviously we'd love to help you. We'd love to help you with midlife MOTs. We've got a great package that we're rolling out. Just give us a shout. Testing and learning together. Yes, we've come to the conclusion, certainly when it comes to managers, that we learn together. So all our managerial work, where we've helped organizations support managers, they do it collectively. It's really, and by the way, we're going to move into chat in about two or 3 minutes. So please do start those chats. Gig working, yes. Remember, we had that marvelous HSM on talent where we really looked at that. Yes, concerns about diversity in the pipeline due to wow changes. Wow. Rebuilding the career proposition, absolutely. We know that from the demographics. Uncertainty feeding anxiety. People are very, very worried, actually. First of all, they had the pandemic, then they had inflation, and now they think they might lose their job. Whoa, that's a big issue. Hiring older talent, love it. Mental health, retention, uncertainty. So, belonging, lots of you are still focusing on belonging. We think that's important. So some of the expectations that we have are also your expectations. So let's be sure that over the coming year, we all work together. At HSM, we are absolutely committed to building a community that together talks about and solves these problems. Many of you are already members of our Future of Work Consortium. If you're not, do please think about joining. It's just a brilliant way of getting together and talking about these really tricky issues. So let's just, as we move into questions, and I'm going to hand over to Harriet in a moment, just remind ourselves of what our key takeaways are. Number one, people are exercising their right to choice. They've had a pandemic. They've thought about, what is it that I want? What is it that others want? So yeah, they're now exercising their choice, their right to choose. Lots of variety, both across organizations and within companies. If you have variety within companies, remember that that's going to be a tension in terms of fairness, and you're going to have to address that. That doesn't mean to say everyone has to be treated the same. That's not what fairness means, but it does mean that you have to think about communicating that and making it clear why there are differences in practices. We did a great HSM masterclass, by the way, on fairness. So do please take a look at that if you'd like to remind yourself about fairness. Connectivity, we think it's important. I can see from the comments that you also think it's important. So let's be sure that we get this right in terms of networks and connectivity, and also realize that there's a lot of tension still between old ways of working and new ways of working. I think that new ways of working have sort of won, but at the same time, recessions are always times when the people move to the status quo because they're anxious. So you have to be very clear that these new ways of working actually increase productivity, increase retention, increase engagement. So I think we're ready to open for questions, and already some great questions.
Well, thank you so much, Lynda, and some really interesting food for thought there, and fascinating to see how aligned we are in terms of the 3 big bets for this year, and then that really even spread across everyone who's joined today. So clearly on all of your minds. Lots of questions and comments already in the chat. They're sitting broadly into 4 buckets, so quite a bit about the multi-generational workforce. And actually, Amanda Chilcott, I'll kick off in just a moment with your question there. Some comments around the status quo. The human workplace has come up a number of times as well, and then hybrid working. And I'd say the hybrid working comments and the human workplace are strongly linked, actually, if you look at the comments there. But Amanda, I wonder if
can I also, just because I'm also just looking at Alice and Patrick saying, just saying about skills gaps. So should we also make sure we go to them as well?
Great minds, Lynda. I thought we'd finish off with that question.
Oh, right great. Thank you. Thanks.
But I wonder, Amanda, if you could possibly, Chilcott, come off put your video on and ask your question for Lynda around older workers. And Lynda, I know this is a place that you've been passionate about for many years.
So I guess, Lynda, what I was thinking, was to what extent you're seeing companies purposefully thinking about redesigning jobs or creating an offer, redefining perceptions to help bring people who we traditionally think of as retired and present something that makes it interesting for them to come back to the workforce when they may not be necessarily looking for the traditional 9 to 5, but they're interested in adding something and they've got value to add.
Yeah. Well, I've been banging on about this forever, Amanda, partly because I'm getting old and partly because I wrote that marvelous book, The 100-Year Life. I'm really disappointed about what's happening. It's come up more in Davos this year than ever before, particularly on the inequality, the diversity thing. So we have what we call a champions meeting, where all of the people who run the councils at Davos get together. And the view is that we have to put age into our inclusion and diversity. In fact, one very smart professor said we should instead of calling it inclusion, diversity, and equity, we should add the A and call it IDEA, IDEA, where we add age. There was a very nice piece in the Deal book, New York Times, Ursula, maybe if anyone's interested, we could send that link to everyone, which came out yesterday or the day before, where I said publicly, I don't think companies are doing enough. I think there's an issue on diversity, and I think that companies should report, just as they do on gender, what they're doing on age. No, I'm very disappointed, actually, Amanda. And I was going to write a Harvard Business Review article about it this year, but honestly, I can't get enough good practices to actually fill an article. So we would love to help anyone out there. Amanda, I don't know what you're feeling, but I'm really disappointed. And what we know from the pandemic is the over 55s haven't come back to work. They are beginning to come back in the US because of money. But what's happened in the UK is that because people think their pension is their home, and because in the UK you have high home ownership, they haven't come back. So I think it's a really pressing issue. There's been lots written about it in the last. Camilla Cavendish did a great piece in the FT about it. The Deal book piece is also very good, and it just basically shows if you've got a labour shortage, you have got to look at your over 55s.
Really interesting. And so if any of you are doing interesting things around older workers, please do pop it into the chat. You've heard from Lynda there that she wanted to write an article on it, but actually there wasn't enough content out there in cases to even write up about it. So one comment here from Claire Carswell around being in the public sector, where the majority of their workforce is 50 plus. So that's an interesting space to be in there. But I think a really pertinent question, Amanda. So thank you so much for sharing it. Yeah. I thought we might now jump on to questions around the human workplace, and Bettina Mann asked an interesting question around the role of soft skills. So Bettina, I wonder if you'd like to pop your video on and ask the question for Lynda.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Hi, Lynda, good to see you.
Hi, Bettina, lovely to see you.
So very encouraged to hear about kind of, the workplace becoming more human-centric. I've been thinking a lot about kind of the role of soft skills and the investment in it by individuals and also by organizations to foster that. And I just wanted to see what developments you saw there, whether there's enough emphasis on it.
Thanks. Great question, Bettina. So when we looked at what great managers do, and it's really part of the whole HSM approach to managerial skills, those what we might call soft or human skills came out as being really important. And what we know is that they're very difficult to develop. So two points I'd make really on that, Bettina. Well, 3 points. The first is there is clear evidence that whilst technical skills sort of get you into the right arena in terms of high performance, it's actually the soft skills, listening, empathy, collaborating, which make a difference. They in a sense catalyze it. You could almost think about them as a catalyst to technical skills. The second point we'd make is that big conversations, obviously, about how technology aids learning. And there is some interesting, which I've written about, some interesting examples of how people are using virtual reality as a means of training people in soft skills. So, for example, you're with an avatar who's a really difficult customer. They carry on being really difficult, and you learn how to deal with a difficult person through your avatar. The third point, and this links it in with the hybrid conversation, is that one of the CEOs said to me, Lynda, we know how to train you in soft skills if you're in the office, but we don't know if you're at home. And so if you want to be trained, you need to be in the office. And I just thought that was quite an interesting point, actually, that quite a lot of soft skills are trained through observation and being around people and getting feedback. And if you're sitting at home in front of your computer, how do you get that? So I think you know, we're going to have to see, and it's a point actually which Rob made earlier, which is when you're in the office, it's got to be a place where you're learning and observing and connecting. So those would be my 3 points. Bettina, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting, actually, for the last point, the observation piece, I think there's something to it. I also wonder for people who even pre-pandemic have always worked with geographically distributed teams, you know, that we've had to kind of learn, even though we're not sitting next to them. So I'm interested to kind of dig into that a little bit more, but yeah. Thank you. Really appreciate your view there.
No, and I agree with you, actually. And I do think it's interesting. I've written about a couple of companies who are completely virtual. And in fact, it's completely virtual that is almost easier than hybrid, because then everybody's in the same position. And there you see a lot of intentionality around building soft skills. And they'll make sure that, you know, you and I, for example, would spend time together, you know, so it can be done, but it has to be done in a very intentional way.
I think just to add to that conversation, we at HSM tend to call it human skills. We feel that soft skills sometimes doesn't share the full impacts that having these skills gives you. And actually one of the big insurance companies calls them power skills, because they say you need technical skills to get up the ladder, but once you're there, these are the skills that will enable you to do your job and are really powerful to have. So I think just an interesting nuance there. Now, we're coming towards, and thank you so much, Bettina, for joining us for that question. We're coming towards the end of our hour. So I thought we'd jump back to that final question around the skills gap. So Alice, I wonder if you'd, Alice Bretherton, like to unmute yourself and ask Lynda your question on that.
Hello, can you see me?
We can.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Alice.
Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Nice to see you.
Good. Well, so yeah, you mentioned a couple of times that skills was really high on the agenda at Davos, and just really keen to understand a bit more about what sorts of skills. I mean, obviously we've touched on the human skills, but what is it that you're seeing that is front of mind for people?
Okay, so the real thing, the real skills issue at Davos is the idea that we need to move. So part of the issue about diversity is that it's so when someone's recruited, particularly at the recruitment time, they are recruited on the basis of their sort of historical provenance, you know, the education they had, the universities they went to, and so on and so forth. And there's a strong view that if you want to really help diversity, you need to pull that away and look at somebody's skills. And so the measurement of skills is becoming a really important issue. And what's very interesting, because at Davos, we also have the tech entrepreneurs. So we have these, you know, what looks like 26-year-olds or 24-year-olds with these building these incredible platforms. And lots of those platforms are about how do you measure skills? How do you measure skills, and how do you then build skills? So I think the point about skills, Alice, is the idea, and it may be, I should probably write something about this because it's quite a specific argument, but the argument is that we need now to move to a skills-based approach to work, so that when somebody is recruited or when they're promoted, you look at skills rather than, you know, what degree did you get? And part of that link, although it's not a particularly strong link, is also apprenticeships. And that was a word that was talked about a lot. I'm not sure I understand. Oh dear. At Davos, the idea that apprenticeships is going to be really, really important. So that's really what I meant by skills, actually, Alice. The idea that you need skilled-based profiling of individuals rather than their education or their age. Yeah.
Interesting. And just we've actually been doing a lot of work on our apprenticeships at the moment as well, and finding that the traditional measures for recruitment with education are not reliable because of all the impact of the pandemic on schooling and education. So having to rethink how we do that. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, the thing is, you know, when you think about what university you went to or what degree you had, that's simply a signaling device to the market. That's all it does. It doesn't really say, you know, you went to so you're obviously brilliant. It simply says it's signaling that you got into that place. So with skills, you have to have a similar signaling mechanism. And that means that you have to have an agreement about what skills are across the labor market. You have to have a means of describing them and benchmarking them, and you have to have a means of assessment, and you have to be able to do that at scale. So it's the sort of scaling that's going to become a real challenge. One of the things that we talk about a lot at the WEF is that so much of our focus is on developed countries and not on countries, continents like Africa, where you need to really scale this stuff. So you're going to see a lot of interesting technology platforms built around how do you identify the skills required in particular jobs.
Thank you.
Really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, Lynda, and so valuable to get that insight just as you return from the snowy slopes of Davos and come back to share that with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynda, for your time today and for sharing the Outlook insights and those thoughts from Davos. It's been a really valuable discussion, and thank you so much to everyone. We had 200 people on the line at one point today from all over the world joining us, so really appreciate everyone coming to spend time. And I think really interesting to see that conversation that we actually haven't made a complete break from last year. We're still talking about the multi-generational workforce. The status quo continues to be a tension point. I think Rob Moffat Mars had shared that perhaps HR wants to change the status quo, and maybe some leaders are more reticent. So an interesting dynamic happening there. Hybrid working is still very much top of mind for so many of you. And then a really interesting point on the skills gap. We will now just take a look at what's coming up next for you. And I'm pleased to say that we've managed to choose the topic that was just your #1 topic for this year. So you said that designing a more human workplace was really top of mind for you all. 36% of you said that. And so that's what we're going to be looking at on Tuesday, the 21st of March. So we'll have Stephen Pearce from Hitachi, the Deputy Managing Director and CHRO, who will be joining Europe CHRO, who will be joining us to come and share his thoughts on this. And I always find him a particularly interesting and insightful person to be learning from. So very much looking forward to having that. Well, what we'll be doing after this is we'll be following up later today with the recording, as always, and the key takeaways. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate all of those comments in the chat. Glad to hear that it's been a useful conversation. And with just a couple of minutes to spare, we'll set you out to your evenings if you're across in Sydney, our team Sydney, or your days for those of you who are in parts of the world where it's still the working day. Thank you so much, and see you in March.